One thing that JB Hunt requires you to do is pick up an empty before you go to a customer. Then you will trade that empty for a loaded container that you take back to the rail yard. This is an automatic. You always have to carry something to a customer. You either have to take a loaded trailer to a customer or an empty to a customer. And I find that there is a loophole in this system, but JB Hunt doesn't seem to care. And that is, if I'm going to some place to pick up, if one of the places that I can get an empty happens to be the same place I'm picking up a trailer. So, for example, let's just say that I would be picking up an empty from a Walmart, and then I have to go to that Walmart to give them the empty in order to pick up a loaded trailer. JB Hunt, I talked to somebody at the office and said, well, do I really need to have an empty if I'm going to be if I can pick up an empty where I'm picking up a loaded? And they said, yes, you still need to get one. And I said, so that means I'd have to go in, pick up an empty, put it in the system, and then basically and once they acknowledge at the office that I picked up an empty, then I can loop back through there and call it, trading the empty for a full. And they said, yes, you have to do it that way. In the system, that's the way it is required. But this is, to me, annoying, because you always have to have a trailer with you before they'll dispatch you on a load. If I show up at a customer and am like, just give me the dispatch a load, not until you have an empty. And we've already talked about the fact that you have to basically have an empty on you, and you're not compensated for that until you go to 3 places. So basically what I am in the process of doing is trying to find as many locations as close as possible where I can, like, especially to the rail yard, I know now 5 places I can go that are very close to each other. And that way, if the first place does not have an empty, or they refuse to let me in because they say, no, we only trade 1 for 1, then I'm going to go to the place next door. And if they only trade me 1 for 1, I'm going to go to the next place, and hopefully that will be a place that will give me one. If not, I will hopefully get rid of all of the 3 stops I need to go to that they don't compensate you for, and I will get that done in 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. Highly annoying that they have this as a requirement, because I don't know that they have enough empties at some of these locations. Because I will talk to the office and they'll say, yeah, they have 22 empties at that place over their pool of 17 or whatever. I'll go there and they're like, we don't have any. That's annoying. Anyway, disorganization is costing drivers like crazy, not just at JB Hunt, all over the place. These are logistics companies. Logistics. Supposedly, it's another word for trucking company, but they're supposed to be working out the whole picking up from some place, dropping off at another, and working it out. But if you talk to most drivers, it seems to be a fairly easy thing to grasp. But it's like, I talk to drivers who are always like, I could do better than that. Maybe it's because we don't understand how the other side, actually works. But one of the things I've routinely said on this channel is that if I will put in a DRT, a driver ready time, and the system will change it on me. And suddenly I'm like, why did it change it? This happens routinely, especially on a Sunday. Their system goes down at 1:30 a.m. and I guess it goes down for maintenance or something like that. But during that time, it really messes with me. If I put in a DRT of something, it will almost always reset itself. So right now, I'm actually on my Monday of next week, of next week's episode. And I'm shut down at a place. And I'll go over what happened to get me here. But anyway, why I'm just parked literally outside. Like, I don't think you can see it behind the truck next to me. There is a Best Buy distribution center. One place that I'll be talking about later in this episode. But anyway, so the thing about it is, though, all these logistics companies that work things out, truck drivers have been used to abuse and used to things that are less than ideal for a long time. And so they just get into the habit of shrugging and saying, that's trucking. You have forgotten that you deserve better. And the trucking companies are the ones lobbying to government, who are the ones that put things back on the trucking companies. So, for example, we're out for 70 hours in a rolling 8-day schedule. So 70 for 8 or 60 for 7. So if I'm out for 5 days, that means I could basically, if I work my entire clock, I'm working 14 hours. Okay, so if I am out for my entire 14 hours for 5 days, I will maximize my clock at 70 hours. The thing about it is, though, there's a lot of things you don't get compensated for. And if this were a normal job, like the other people in the office that, like managers and stuff that work 40 hours a week, they get compensated for 40 hours. If a driver is out for, let's just say, out for 62 and a half hours. Okay? The reason I'm saying that is because that is not quite 70, but if your first 40 hours are at regular time and then any additional is time and a half, which would be fair if we were compensated at time and a half, then trucking companies wouldn't want us to work more than 40 hours a week. But if we were compensated at time and a half or 1.5 times our mileage for anything that's over 40 hours, then it would actually be more fair to drivers because we are living in these trucks. We are away from our families. Right now, as I'm doing this update, it is 2 days before Christmas. Well, 3 days before Christmas. And I will be out this week during Christmas. And I'll talk about this next week. But how much is trucking worth to you? How much is it worth for you being away from your family? And again, people will say, well, you chose this career. This is your life. Well, the problem is, yes, but it doesn't have to be the way that a lot of these trucking companies are when they say, oh, no, you're out for 7 days and you're home for 2. If you're out for 7 days, that means that you're basically working like 10 hours a day. Might as well work 14. Hit it hard for 5 days and not be out for 2 additional days when you're paid the same. 7 days versus 5 days, 70 hours a week, it would pay the same. There is no time and a half. There is no additional incentive pay or something like that when you work over 40 hours a week. So it's one of those things where you can take time off, you can schedule time off, but still there is a lot of things that you end up sacrificing. You're not there for your family. You're not there for certain events. You're not there for different activities. And how much is that really worth? Especially when trucking companies are trying to find ways of paying you as little as possible. Anyway, throwing that out there. My revelation for this week is that I've heard this for a while, but it finally just rang true as to what it was. I always thought that if I pick up a trailer and it's beeping at me as I leave, as I drive away, I thought that was a security little thing on there that was beeping. Come to find out that it is the auto-inflating tire mechanism on the trailers. If you push in to release the trailer brakes and you start driving away, it's going to beep at you, and there's a little light that goes on right over the handle to release the pins so that way you could slide your tandems. So that light will come on while it's self-inflating until it maxes out, until it hits what it's supposed to, and it will beep at you. But I have always heard this and thought it was a security, related to a security something. But I ended up realizing what it was because I will always check my tires, but when you bang on tires and you listen to the resonance, sometimes it will sound a little bit low, but I'll notice that it's auto-inflating. And usually by the time I get to security, it will be full. This last week, though, there were 2 tires that were very low. And as I was doing my pre-trip of that trailer, I went ahead and turned and pushed in the trailer brakes. That way it would start inflating. And after a few minutes, it hadn't fully inflated. It was still inflating. So I went ahead and said, okay, there's enough pressure for me to hit the road, but I'm going to have to check it before I get to a weigh station because this was during the day. And then as I was driving, I kept hearing beep, 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 and kept noticing, because I was going to be hitting the weigh stations about the time that the sun came up. But it was dark at the time, and I noticed that the light was on when I looked back in my West Coast mirrors. And when I was looking at my mirrors, I was like, wait a second now. I wonder. And then it went off after a time, and I quickly jumped out, checked, and banged on the tires, and the 2 tires that were low were suddenly full. So if you drive for JB Hunt and you haven't realized that, like me, you're a little faster than me, hopefully, if you caught it. And if you're about the same speed as me, or just don't pay attention or something like that, like I just didn't realize it for a while. That's the reason why. That's the reason why it happens. Because straight up, it's because of the beeping that happens while it's filling up the tires with air. Anyway, my first assignment was to take a container from Palmetto to the Atlanta rail yards. And I was so happy it wasn't buried, because I got this assignment and I said, it's going to be buried. Right as I was going to sleep, I was like, it's going to be this. I was looking over my shoulder and I was looking around the rail yards. I'm like, it's going to be that trailer right there. So I got out and went looking around, and it wasn't. It ended up being a trailer that was directly behind me. So, and it had plenty of room for me to pull up, provided nobody pulled up in a bobtail or something like that behind it, which I was hoping they wouldn't. I thought about driving over there and hooking it up, but then if I did that, then I would be opening a can of worms for anybody else to park bobtail behind the trailers. And I didn't want to do that, just in case someone was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to park back here," even though that's not their trailer. Anyway, so I would be tempted to take it to the other rail yard, the one that's right across the way, like the Palmetto yard. You have to type in your code and go across the street to get to the main yard where you would park if you had trailers. And I didn't want to end up moving the vehicle just in case I hit the drive line or something like that. So I didn't. In the meantime, though, I picked up this trailer and I dropped off in Atlanta, and then I also had a pickup there. So I got back to Atlanta and I picked up a load straight from the same place that was going up to Tennessee. And so it was Sunday, traffic wasn't terrible, so I hit the road and ended up shutting down at the Quick Trip at exit 308. And I had 15 minutes left on my 11-hour drive time clock. On my Tuesday, I got up and I got to Midway, Tennessee, the Walmart up 181, and it was an easy drop and hook. I got out of there, and I arrived in Loudon, Tennessee, at the Del Conca at 5:55 a.m. Now, the doors opened at 6, as did the office, but the loaders don't show up until 7:30 a.m., so I basically had to hang out there for a bit. Now, luckily, they had me loaded just after 8 a.m., even though my appointment time wasn't until 10 a.m. Now, I started to realize and put 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 together. The computer system at JB Hunt goes down on Sunday at 1:30 a.m. And when it goes down at 1:30 a.m., I think there's some glitches and some screwiness that happens in the system for the next few hours after, because almost always I end up getting a live load or some sort of a screwy load on Monday. And I think I figured out why. I'll report this in next week's episode. But this live load that was supposed to be at 10 a.m., when I knew full and well I was going to be arriving before 6, and they delayed me. Luckily, I was only there like just over 2 hours. But still, assigning me these live loads late in my day where I just have to sit around and wait is really annoying. But I think I have figured out why this is. Again, I'll talk to you about it next week. So I headed to Fairburn to drop off and was pre-assigned to the Best Buy in Dublin. Had about 75 minutes left, and the container was placed on top of the front pin. So there's 2 pins in the very front that you end up having to slide in to lock in place. And one of them had been in when they dropped down the container. So it was literally on there. So I had to jump in the line for the crane, the little portable crane with the dude pulling over there and lifting it up, in order for him to lift it up and get it out. And unfortunately, getting in that line, it ended up wasting like half an hour because there were so many trucks in that line. By the time I got up there and he lifted up the thing and I pulled the lock, because the pin's in the forward position, you have to, when he takes the pressure of the container off of it, I'm able to loosen it, pull it back, then he drops the container back in there. I check and make sure everything is locked, and then it was good to go. Now, when I got there, I had 75 minutes left on my drive clock. I could have gone north on 85, around 285 to 75 south, and then shut down at a truck stop. But by the time I got out of there, I only had 45 minutes left on my clock. At this point, I didn't trust it. because anything can happen. And going north on, by the time you take almost 10 minutes to get to the interstate, by the time you go on 85 north, you take, 5 minutes and no traffic around to 75 south, you chew through 25 to 30 minutes of your time, and it's just not worth the risk. By the time you get down to that, the first truck stop is going to be farther than 15 minutes, so you're not going to be able to get down there very well. So anyway, that was something. I ended up shutting down at Palmetto instead. So I had to shut down at the office. Anyway, my Wednesday, I got out of the Palmetto, and right as I was leaving the gate, ding, 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 a train came through. Well, I was thinking that it was going to just delay me, but it luckily ended up being a train that it had already been in the forward position. I had seen the train during my pre-trip, and then I saw it clear. So I was like, okay, good, it's going to be clear. But apparently what it had done is it had pulled forward. You know how the trains either they pull in like a quarter of a mile or whatever it is, then they disconnect and they pull back, and then they change over the track, and then they push back in there. Well, apparently it was during one of those things. So I saw the arms, as soon as I got out there, I saw the arms go up, and I was like, get through there real quick before the train ended up coming back. Got through there, and right as I got on the other side of it and I started pulling away, I noticed that the arms were, the lights were going again. So I had my little window of about 3 minutes and got out right there, which was great. The one thing I will say is that when I was at Palmetto, before I left there, I ended up talking to my manager. Since it was technically a Monday, I went and talked to him before I went to sleep. And I asked him about Christmas Day. I said, how busy is it? Because he sent out a message that said, for Christmas Day, let us know if you want to work, because working holidays is optional. You're not paid for them until you hit 1 year. And I've been there for 2 months. So I wouldn't get paid for the holiday. But working a holiday is optional. So he said, let us know if you want to work. So I messaged and then I asked about Christmas. And then I said, you know what, I might as well just go on in. And so I went in and actually talked to him there in person. And I asked him about working Christmas. I said, are there loads? He said, yeah, there are loads. I said, am I going to be like pulling someplace and waiting forever for a load? Or do you have loads that are going to be working? He says, we should have loads. I'm like, all right, so you'll be able to keep me moving. He said, yeah, we should. And if worse comes to worse and we can't keep you moving, then just go back to Palmetto and shut down and go home for Christmas. I'm like, okay, I guess that's fair enough. But then that means I would just have to go back later that night in order to work Christmas Day in the evening in order to basically finish on Boxing Day, which is where my schedule officially ends. So I was asking him about that, and he was telling me that there are loads. So I'm going to chance it. I'm going to try working on Christmas. I've already worked it out with my family where the kids are going to do stockings. I'll have a stocking here. I'll call them and do a video call when I'm done with my day. They're going to get up in the morning. We usually go see a movie on Christmas Day and in the theater, and they're going to go see a movie in the late morning. So that way, while I'm out driving around, and then if they're not back from the movie by the time I get there, then what I'll do is depending on where I'm shutting down, if I'm shut down at a truck stop, I'll shower or whatever, and then early afternoon around 1 or something like that, I'll catch up with them, and we'll open our stockings, and then we're delaying Christmas with our gift giving to each other until the following day. That way I'll be home for it. And the kids are totally on board with that. Good kids. Really good kids. Anyway. So I arrived at Dublin and was out of there in 20 minutes. Then I was sent to the Georgia Pacific in Rincon, Georgia, just north of Savannah. And I got there around 4:45 a.m. and was out in just over 30 minutes. Had a slight rain delay, but it really didn't stop morning traffic on 75 North to 285 and then to 85, which was really surprising when I got back to Atlanta. I expected there to be some sort of delays because normally when you approach Macon, there's sometimes a little bit of construction delay. There wasn't. And then I hit 75 North, got to 285, no delays. 285 around to 85, No delays. I mean, it slowed down a little bit just as you enter the ramp to go into 85 South, because it slows down to like 40 miles an hour for the ramp. But it didn't really stop. And I found that if you go down past it, if it's lined way up like half a mile, and you don't want to jump in front of other trucks because it's just it's bad form, go down the next exit, which is Old National Highway, and take that exit, and then you take the exit ramp, and then you basically do a 270-degree loop, and then it throws you right onto 85 South. So that's what I did. That way I'm not jumping in front of people. I don't have to try to feel like I need to drive aggressive to jump in front of someone. I'm not making anybody mad or any of that kind of stuff. I just jump in the truck and take the next exit and then loop around. It's fine. Anyway, I got to Fairburn with just over 2 hours left on and nearly 90 left on my work day. So I had just over 2 hours or something like that, but I had 90 minutes after I was starting to leave there, and I was pre-assigned to Best Buy in Charlotte, North Carolina, this place right behind me. And traffic on 85 North was terrible. Waited at the rail yard for nearly 45 minutes for traffic to clear, and this was all right. Here's the thing. I had 2 hours on my drive. It was 2 hours and 4 minutes on my drive clock. But I had about 90 minutes left on my work day. That was not including my drive clock. This is where I was going with this. So what I chose to do is, because I knew traffic was pretty bad in the morning, I looked at my traffic before I left the rail yard, and I said, 285 is terrible. 85 is terrible. You're supposed to always take the loop around. You're supposed to take 285 around. So I sat there at the rail yard and just let time accrue. And after waiting about half an hour, I looked at it. Traffic was clearing up. Waited until about 45 minutes. Traffic was still clearing out. I had about 45 minutes left on my work day outside of my 2 hours drive. So at this point I was like, you know what? It's starting to clear. I called the DOT, state of Georgia, and asked them what was going on. They said, yes, typical traffic. But I know that area of 285 where it was backed up right between 85 and I-20 on the east side perimeter on the outside loop. So I said, you know what? I know I'm supposed to take 285 around, but instead I'm going to go straight through the city because the city was practically clear. It was a little bit of a delay, and I know you're not technically supposed to do this, but I went ahead and did it anyway. You always hear me say I like to follow the rules. This is one time I didn't. Why? Because to me, I looked at the traffic cameras and stuff like that, and they were doing construction in that area, and it was construction delays. Which they normally don't do construction delays until night. They're supposed to stop the construction delays in that area during the day. But for whatever reason, they were doing it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to go and get myself in that mess. I'm going to drive right through the city. Which I know that if I'm pulled over or something like that, I can't claim that that I was just picking up the Atlanta rail yard, or I'm going to the Atlanta rail yard, because my GPS would say otherwise. My load would say otherwise. I can't claim if I get on the other side of that and I'm starting to go north, I can't claim that I just picked up in Atlanta, because if they look at my electronic log devices, they'll say I picked up in Fairburn, and then it will reveal that I lied. So you have to be honest. ELDs will keep you honest. So I got through the city though, and I was expecting, with the delays and stuff like that, for me to maybe have to shut down at one of the Walmarts, like the one off of Sardis Church Road off of exit 120 at Hamilton Mill, which is my local Walmart that I live near. And it ends up being one that I stopped at quite a bit when I was working at Martin on the noise ordinance runs. But I ended up making better time up there, so I pressed on. After 120, the next exit you could potentially stop at is 129, but they charge you $20 for parking. I didn't want to stop there, so I went on past. Exit 137 is the next one. Didn't want to stop there, so I continued on. Exit 147 is the next one, then 149. These are all exits with truck stops or parking. And after 149, the next one's 160. With a truck stop. And I ended up making it to the 160, exit 160, and I'm watching it close. And I ended up having, when I pulled into my parking spot there, 5 minutes left on my drive clock. But as I was driving up, I had the geotab on. I was looking at my time and I was looking at the traffic and stuff like that. I said, you know what, I'm going to chance it. It would be my luck that there would be a traffic jam or something like that would pop up, a crash or something just to mess me up, but ended up not. And so when I was looking at it, I was like, all right, it'll be about 11 minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so when I get pulling off on that exit. I said, I'm going to take the chance. I got up there. It was 9 minutes when I pulled off on the exit because of the delays of the truck, and how it always will coast as soon as it gets up to the crest of the hill. So it doesn't want to go down the hill going faster than 62. And which means you can slam on the gas and it doesn't go faster than 62. You put it in cruise control, it doesn't want to go past 62. It will coast down a hill. So if you're trying to catch someone, you can catch them going up a hill, but then as soon as you start to crest the hill, if you haven't passed them already, they're going to pass you because they have the muscle, you don't. Good old Gilda. Anyway. So, shut down with 5 minutes left on my clock. Now, I was annoyed because after the Charlotte, I was going to have an 8 a.m. live load in Anderson, South Carolina. And since I start my day at 22:40, I was going to start my day at 22:40. It was going to be highly annoying. So anyway, here's what happened on my Thursday. It was terrible because this live load, I was stopped at 160, so it would take me a little bit over 2 hours to get here to this Best Buy. Once I drop off here and pick up my empty, I would get down there to Anderson, and they had scheduled me this live load that was starting at like 8 a.m. That was 8 a.m. at the earliest. And I tried to get them to reschedule me, and they would not. I got up here to this Best Buy, and it ends up being that the appointment time was old. The appointment time when the load left, it was on the 10th. At this point, it was on the 17th. Or early on the 18th, one of the two. But apparently the appointment time was over a week old, so it was invalid. And I pulled up there and told him, and he says, yeah, the appointment time's old, so I can't use it. He said, call your dispatch. And then he says, but I'll tell you what's going to end up happening. This happens every now and then, and when it happens, the drivers end up driving away. I was like, that's great to know. So anyway, I called the office, and they said, yeah, we'll get you another appointment number. Give us 20, 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, so I sat there and waited. And about 20 minutes later, I called the office, and after I got through the hold, he says, yeah, hold on a second. Let me see what I can find out, and I'll keep you on hold. And I'm hearing him keep me on hold while he's doing work, and he's doing other things. I keep talking to him, and he's like, yeah, we're still waiting. And I sat on the phone with him for about half an hour, so now it's been almost an hour that I've been there. And then he comes back and says, yeah, I'm going to need you to just hang out there another hour while we get this sorted out and get you that appointment number. I'm like, great. Nothing like starting off your day with your 3 hours of work that's not including your drive time, chewing it all up, just completely destroying every bit of it. Because you have a 15-minute pre-trip and then wasting 2 hours. That just totally screws everything up. So once I get in there and do my drop and hook after waiting 2 hours or whatever, almost my entire 3 hours, I'm going to be driving, and any stops I do are going to be cutting into my drive time, which is highly annoying. Anyway, I got to a Charlotte at 1:38. And at that 1 hour mark, they canceled the pre-plan, which I was like, good. The pre-plan for that live load at 8 a.m. is gone. Awesome. But after being there for nearly 2 hours, now it's like 3:40 a.m. I get a message that says, drop it off at the JB Hunt drop yard at wherever it happens to be. It's also here in Charlotte. So I said, okay, great. Route me there, and I will do that. Well, once I do that, I have to pick up an empty. And they don't have empties at the drop yard. People drop full trailers in the drop yard exactly as I am. So they don't have any empties. I had to go and find one. The office, I contact the office. They say, yeah, we'll give you some locations. I show up at one. They ended up getting me over to a drop yard where I was able to pick up a load or pick up an empty. It was, I think, a TJ Maxx or something like that. But it was still annoying. Here's something that I came to find out later. Actually, you know what? I'll address this later when I get there. So that way, at least I'm covering things kind of on task. Anyway, so I picked up an empty, and then was assigned to get down to a Georgia Pacific in Darlington, South Carolina. And this is the one occasion that my company GPS routed me on a back road, and it had a shorter drive time than Waze did. Waze was telling me to stay straight on 77, get on 20, and I think it was, and go to Darlington. It was about 140 miles. And I knew that if I was going 65 miles an hour, it would take me about 2 hours and 15 minutes to get there. But if I took the back roads, it was going to be right at about 100 miles. And I said, you know what? If I hit back roads and I'm driving mostly 55 with some areas that are slower, I will probably be there in roughly about 2 hours. So I'm going to take a gamble. Ended up playing out. I got there, and it was about 2 hours and 5 minutes when I got there, which was great. It's better than me going 140 miles on the interstate and, trying to go there at 65 miles an hour and getting there in 2 hours and 15 minutes. That was the time Waze was saying, which means that Waze is expecting you to go 70 miles an hour, not 65. So it would have been even longer there in a CMV. So anyway, I got to the Georgia Pacific, and the lady in the office said, okay, your trailer's not ready yet. And I was like, oh, it's not. And she says, no, it'll probably be ready late this afternoon. And by the time I got there, it was like 9 something, like 9 a.m., something like that. And I was like, later this afternoon? She, yeah, I'll come back at about 5. Maybe, it'll probably be ready by then. I contact the office and say, look, I have like 4 hours left on my clock almost. I said, if you can give me something else, I can't pick this thing up. And they said, let's contact the planners and we'll get back to you. I get a message about 15 minutes later. It says, planners want you to shut down. Take your 10 and then go and pick it up. I'm like, are you kidding me? So anyway, I'm so frustrated by this. But I'm like, okay, fine. So I say, all right. And I find that there's a pilot 6 minutes away. I shut down, or 6 miles away. I shut down there and run inside, go to the restroom, and then I come back out. I say, you know what, I'm going to call the office and see if I get someone else, if they can change it. So I end up talking to someone else. And the person says, oh yeah, let me see what we can find out for you. Let me see what we can get for you. And then after about 45 minutes, I was assigned to go to an international paper in Sumter, South Carolina. An hour and 15 minutes later, I got there. So it was about just before 11. And this is a god-awful, disorganized location. They only, apparently, from the looks of it, they only do live loads. And there was a driver, there was a guy that was there, a Walmart fleet driver, who said that he had arrived there the day before, and they told him they weren't going to get to him for a couple hours. His clock was going to expire. So he ended up saying, all right, well, I'll leave and come back tomorrow. He came back after his clock resetted, and he put him right back in the system, but he had to get back in line. So they didn't just plan on him. He had to get back in line. And so he had been waiting there 2 hours when I got there. And he says, I've been here since yesterday. I'm like, geez. Because he had to find a truck stop. And the nearest truck stop was about 25 minutes away. So anyway, I go in there and they say, yeah, we don't have the product to do your live load. And I said, what do you mean? They said, we don't have the product that you need for us to load you. So we can't do your load. I call the office and I'm like, they don't have the product to do the live load. They said, okay, we have to verify this. So just like they had to do at the Georgia Pacific, they had me sit around and waste a bunch of time while they contact the office and try to figure out what's going on. They end up sending me a message. And this is one of the things I really hate about this. They don't call you. They just send you a message and then they don't answer the call when you turn around. I got a message that said you're going to have to wait for the appointment time. The appointment time was noon. I got there just before 10. And by this point, it was like 10:45. And so it says, you're going to have to wait for the appointment time. As if that's going to change it if they don't have the damn stuff there. Because when I was in there, I asked, I said, are you going to get a supply of it today? And they said, I don't think so. But we could, who knows? But I don't think we're going to have the stuff to do this load today. And I'm like, okay. So if I waited around till noon, they still weren't going to be able to get to me. But still waste my time until noon? That's what the office wanted me to do. Now, this is really extremely annoying to me because if I were to have done this and I had any delays after noon, since my clock was going to expire at 12:45, I would have ended up sitting there. And then if I got out of there anytime after 12:15, I would have been running out my clock someplace. Probably it could have been on the way to the nearest truck stop. So I ended up calling the office, and it was like 10:45, and said, "Look, if you want me to wait until the appointment time's noon. My clock expires at 12:45. I can't do this." And they said, "Oh, okay, gotcha. Go ahead and find a safe haven and shut down." So between Best Buy right behind me not accepting my load and me wasting 2 hours plus there, then me going to Darlington and them saying, your trailer's not going to be ready until late this afternoon, and then International Paper that said we don't have the product to actually do your load, I got no load fees that day. I just drove around. And to make it even worse, it was only like 300 and some odd miles. So it was like 340 miles. It was like half the normal miles I do, and I got no load fees. Because if you don't drop off a load or pick up a load and trade your empty for it, you don't get the load fee or the drop and hook fee. You don't get a live load fee unless you're live loading. So to me, this was like unacceptable, because I went to Best Buy, then I went to the drop yard, then I went to Darlington, then I went to International Paper, and then I went to shut down and did not get any fees that day. So my total that day that I got money-wise for all my mileage and stuff was like just over $200, which is terrible, because this was a full 14-hour day for me. So if you do the math on this, you know what? I'm going to do the math right now. I have not looked at the math on this, but calculator. That was by the time I got there and I shut down, it was probably, what time was it? So I think I made like $204 that day. So let me think. No, it wasn't $204. I remember now. I had to think about it for a second. It ended up not being 204. It ended up being 214. So divide that by, how many hours was it? By the time I got out of there and got over to the thing, it was 12. It was 11. It was about 11:30. So my clock shut down at 12:45. That was a 12.75 hour day. So divided by 12.75, that means I made $16.78 per hour that day. When I drove for DoorDash, I was making more than that. If I did the lunch, if I did breakfast, lunch, or dinner runs. Terrible. Anyway, I was highly annoyed because I was making about $400 a day for the first 3 days. And then they just totally screwed me up on this Thursday with all this garbage. So, anyway, I ended up getting an assignment at a Silvano in Eastover, South Carolina on my Friday. Woke up, went over there. Now, it's a huge warehouse, and there's a lot of busy work to do there. First of all, it was raining. So I got there, and when you first pull up there, they say, okay, let's check you in and stuff like that. Then they say, you're going to have to go down here, cross over railroad tracks and whatever, pull up to this place for the trailer clean out. And you have to clean out and sweep out your trailer. Then it's got to be approved by someone. So you have to flag down or call this number, and one of their yard jockeys comes and verifies everything and inspects the whole thing. And once it's approved, then they'll allow you, he'll sign off on this form that says it was checked by them. And then you take that form with you to get your paperwork. So then I dropped off the empty. I picked up my full trailer. Then I went to the office to get my bill of lading, and I had to turn in my paper that showed that I had fully swept it out to their standards, and it had been checked. So anyway, I got to their office. They gave me the bill of lading, and then I had to go back through, wiggling around over all the railroad tracks and back through the whole system, because basically you pull up and you pull in here, but you have to go all the way around and loop all the way around until you're like here. Then you have to go all the way back around, and the speed limit's like 15 miles an hour. So the roads could not be much worse. They were just bouncing, and just it's horrendous over there. So anyway, by the time I got out of there, it was well over an hour. I hit the road and I drove back to drop off in Palmetto, and then I said, you got anything else? Because I have like 5.5 hours left on my clock. I have like half of my drive hours left. And at this point, I also had like half of my extra. So basically, I had half of my clock left. I had like 90 minutes left of my non-drive clock, and then about just under 5.5 hours of drive time. And the office is like, yeah, we don't really have anything for you. And I'm thinking, man, all these times that they just do not have a load. It's so annoying. Anyway, I was like, okay, whatever. So I went ahead and went back in, ended up finishing the day with about another $100 and some odd, I think it was. I think the last 2 days I was out, I barely made what I would in one day if they would have planned me right. So, effective time management? No, just effective planning. But I think part of the reason why is because it's a holiday. They keep saying, it's a holiday season. When I got to the international paper, I saw a JB Hunt guy waiting to get loaded, and I said, hey, is this normal? He said, this is the worst year I've seen. He says, normally they keep you moving constantly. We have plenty of freight. This time, he says the past couple of weeks it's been light. And it's been kind of difficult to get loads. Sometimes you sit there and wait a while. I'm like, so it's not just me. As a matter of fact, he seemed to indicate to me that sometimes he was waiting for an hour or two to get a load when normally I'm calling the office. I'm like, hey, come on, give me something here. And then I'll give him like 15 minutes. And if I don't have a load, I'll turn around and call back. And then I think that they contact the planners again. The planners are finally like, okay, fine, I'll give him something to get him to shut up. Anyway, so I went and did my post trip. I shut down and decided that I actually had something I had to do in the morning down near the JB Hunt building. So I went ahead and decided, since I had worked overnight and just spent so much time, I was going to have time waiting, I went ahead and took a nap, and then I figured I'd go and talk to my manager before I left. Because I was noticing that I wasn't being routed properly. You're supposed to be routed from place to place to place in order for you to get the money for it. And so I went inside and I said, I went over with my manager and I said, so I went to the Best Buy, then I went to JB Hunt, also in Charlotte. Then from there I went to Darlington, or actually I went someplace else, but they would not route me there to get an empty. Then I went to Darlington, then I went to, and I basically told them the routing I did. And then when I got to the Eastover, they was like, okay, so you should be good to go now. But when I told him I went from Best Buy, Charlotte, to JB Hunt Drop Yard, Charlotte, he said, he put it in there and said, okay, that paid $0 because it's the same zip code. So I said it was 13 miles. He said, yeah, but I have to route it this way. So again, Rand McNally miles not being good to me. All right, so let's go ahead and end this episode with the garbage that is Rand McNally miles. How many miles did I do total in the week? 2472.9. So 2,472.9 miles. And how many was I paid for? I was paid for that week 2,252 miles. 2,252. So I was shorted by 230 miles. Part of that's because, find a safe haven, and then they route me back the exact opposite direction anyway. I'm getting really annoyed with these Rand McNally miles. I think I told you already, I'm in the process of looking for another company. I know that JB Hunt does pay better than the past two companies I have been working for. I can deal with some of the garbage, but at the same time, if I can find a trucking company that pays you, that compensates you better, that compensates me better. I hate the fact that the truck it has no muscle, or it's so weakified. It's weakened so greatly by how they put through everything in it. It just really annoys me. That, and the fact that there's so many things you're just like, yeah, go ahead and shut down. We're not going to pay you for that. We're not going to dispatch you until you get an empty, and we don't pay you for that. And then, oh yeah, we can't route you because, how, God knows how they route this stuff, but it routes the shortest possible way, which I don't always think is a CMV route, even though they say it is. I want to find a company that does either practical miles or hub miles. I didn't ask when I was at Schneider. I was too early. But when I got to Martin, I realized it was something called hub miles. And I even talked to the lady that was a week behind me taking her CDL test. She told me you want to find a company that does hub miles. And when I found Martin, I was like, oh, that's awesome. Even then, they didn't pay if it was within 10% of, because sometimes that would be a little 10% under on one reload. It would be 10% over on another or something like that. So it would all basically even out roughly. But JB Hunt, I'm always less. I'm always handing the company a good $125 to $150. So anyway, I still continue to have my feelers out there, because if I can find a company that will actually pay hub miles or practical miles, that will pay me properly, that will give me 5 days out, I'm going to do that. I don't like the nanny state that JB Hunt just runs me, and they're just, they're constantly just, the system will update my DRT and push it like 5.5, 6 hours after I want it to be there, after I had set the time, and it just decides it's going to glitch or just decide it's going to update on its own. And when it does that, it's designed to try to help me out, but it doesn't help me out, because it screws me up. Because if my driver ready time is set for 5 a.m. and I'm 2.5 hours away from a live load that starts at 8, they'll say, oh, it's going to work out great. No, it's not. Because I start hours before that. When I call the office and say, why would they send me there? And they're like, oh, it's okay, just leave later. I'm not going to leave later. If I do that, then it pushes me way too far into my day on my Friday. I'm not going to do that. I'll just go there and sit there and stew about it and be frustrated. They'll learn, or I will just constantly sit on the clock. And if the company ever decides to not pay me for an extended detainment because I arrived there early, if they call it like a failure of service, or you showed up too early or whatever, and decides not to pay me that detainment, I'll tell them, okay, that's okay, that's fine. I'll just contact the Georgia Department of Labor, and I'll just submit it to them, and they'll pay it. They'll make sure it's paid. I don't want to end up having to use that threat, because in a right to work state like Georgia, they can fire you for anything, and I wouldn't put it past them. If I say something like that, it might come through as, oh, he's threatening us. I'm not threatening you. I'm just telling you that I deserve to be compensated. And if you refuse to compensate me for something I deserve to be compensated for, it will be me calling the Georgia Department of Labor and saying they're not paying me. So they'll contact them. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.